I'm going to begin with a warning. Some of the Darknet horror stories in this podcast might be frightening to some. Most of these stories, such as the one today, are true stories that have happened to others. Some are told directly by the victim, and others are mini documentaries from crime reports or true online forums. The stories or events in the episodes might be triggering to some people. These stories are meant for an adult audience, as their content can be disturbing. While many of the stories are true, the names of the victims and the stalkers or predators have been changed, unless the alleged criminal has been charged in a court of law. The accused are presumed innocent until proven guilty. I know that phrase can be frustrating when you know the story is true, but unless the predator is brought to justice, it is how our system works to protect the innocent. This episode I know for a fact is true because it happened to me, and I am tired of hiding in the shadows, being afraid of the consequences. The first part of the story is about another predator before the Darknet even existed. It is the reason why I kept my mouth shut until now. I recently started to be harassed by someone who held me against my will in his home, and the first story in this episode has a lot to do with the second. The first criminal in this story doesn't have a social media account anymore because he was outed for what he was in public, and I suppose he didn't want that to happen again. He is living a fine life as the head of a medical center teaching at a college in California. He really should be behind bars and chastised for his behavior in the past. There is nothing anyone can do about that now. I hope if he has ever done anything else that justice is one day served. This is what he did to me and why I never said anything about what happened later. Back when I was 9 years old, my father supported the family by working many miles away and didn't get home until our dinner time around 6 p.m. This was pretty normal for people during that time. My mother was a stay-at-home mom with projects such as 4-H and sometimes volunteering at the local school district. I often came home to an empty house as my brother and sister were both in high school and had their own studies. The school bus would drop me off at about 3 in the afternoon. I'd go inside, and if Mom was home, which she usually was, I'd have an afternoon snack of cookies or whatever she had ready. Back then, elementary school students didn't have pages and pages of homework that they're given now, so I would either go out and ride my horse or watch Batman and Scooby-Doo. If I hadn't seen the show before and I didn't want to go riding, I'd go into my room and play with my Barbies and model horses. This one particular day, Mom wasn't home and neither were my siblings, and Dad was still at work. We felt safe out in the country. Our closest neighbor was my best friend, who was about 4 years older than I was. She was probably still at school that day because we would often hang out to play Barbies or ride horses together, and she hadn't contacted me yet. As a 9-year-old kid who wasn't afraid of anyone in the neighborhood, I most likely left the back sliding glass door unlocked. We always locked the front door because this is where people usually knocked, but honestly, I'm not even sure if we had it locked that day. I don't remember being a latchkey kid where I needed to have a key on me or under the mat, but it was many years ago. That afternoon, I went straight to my bedroom and started playing with my Barbies. I was sitting in the middle of the room when someone walked in. And please note that all the names in the stories I'm about to tell you have been changed, but the age and characteristics of the people remain the same. "Hey, is Ron home?" A voice came through the door, and I looked up. It was my brother's friend Tip looking for my brother Ron. No, he'll be home after school," I said, still playing with my dolls. It was then Tip came in and shut the door behind him. He kneeled next to me, and I can't remember if he started a conversation with me or if he just gave the order for me to lie down on the bed with my face down. I thought maybe he was playing some silly game of hide and seek, I suppose, so I did what he said and buried my face in the pillow and started counting. I then heard some rustling behind me and felt his body on mine. I can still remember the nastiness of his raspy breath behind me as he did whatever he did. Some details I will not go into here. He did not remove my clothes, but when he sat up, he was buckling his belt. I will never know for a fact what he did exactly, but I have some sick idea. Confused and a bit frightened, I didn't move. He knelt down next to my bottom bunk and warned me if I told anyone that he would kill my brother and family. That sentence started a downward spiral of what I consider psychological trauma. About a week later, I was out in the side pasture with my horse and pony. Tip casually walked up to me and sparked up a conversation as if everything was normal. I don't remember exactly what he was saying. All I remember is he was trying to put his hands in places they didn't belong. My horse wasn't all too happy with it. She knew I was scared and her ears were flat back. My best friend fortunately interrupted his dirty deed as she walked up to the edge of our lawn above the pasture and asked what I was doing. I looked at her and responded with something about getting the horses ready to ride and asked if she wanted me to come over. When I turned around, Tip was walking away. I didn't see him at the ranch again. Subsequently, my parents were divorced and I moved into a condo with my sister and mom. My brother sometimes stayed there, but he didn't stay long because it was only a 2-bedroom condo and sleeping on the couch was probably hard to do. His friends sometimes came over, but I don't remember if Tip ever did. I vaguely remember seeing that creeper's face at the condo, but there is some part of me that doesn't want to remember. I have no idea if he ever came back, and I never told anyone of what he originally did because I was afraid he would kill all of us. Then the worst instance of my life happened with my ex-boyfriend, the one who began stalking me later online in life. We started dating when I was a month away from turning 16. We moved away from the 2-bedroom condo into a house, and I found some really good lifetime friends in the neighborhood, so I had it pretty nice. Mom's alimony had run out, but she still did receive child support from me. My other siblings were over 18, so theirs had stopped. This meant that she had to get a job and work outside the home, leaving me alone in the afternoons. At 15, I started dating this guy. I was still not intimately active with anybody at this point because I was still 15. This new boyfriend and I eventually fell in love, and we were together for over a year before we became intimate. After that, I guess he felt as if he owned me. He was very controlling and didn't like me to hang out with friends. He had cheated on me a few times before, once that I knew about, and stupidly took him back. It was then I found a letter from another girl, rather a woman, from another state when I broke up with him. She had detailed their night together in the letter, and when I confronted him about it, he at first said he didn't know what I was talking about, and when I showed him proof, he tried to beg me to stay, but I left him anyway. He at first would ask me to come over and talk about what had happened. I did, and he cried, begging me to come back. When I said no, he held a gun to his head and threatened to kill himself. I knew he wouldn't, so I left, praying he didn't pull the trigger. That was traumatizing enough. For months, he followed me around in his car and would wait for me to get out of school and would try to pick me up from school, so I had to avoid him while hiding away until he left the parking lot. We even moved to the woods 30 miles away in another city to get away from him. When we first moved, he would call the new phone number and just listen to me say hello, forcing us to change the number several times. I had also dropped my 6th-period class and started parking my car in the teacher's back parking lot at school so he wouldn't see the car. One day during my 5th-period class, a message called out to me over the loudspeaker telling me I had to go to the office because my brother had been in an accident. The moment I walked out of class, my ex-boyfriend was there, begging me to talk to him. This was months after I left him. I told him I had to go because my brother had been in an accident. He said no, there was no accident, and he had lied about the call to get me out of class so I would talk to him. I told him no, and I went back into class, and from what I remember, I didn't hear from him again for a while. Eventually, he stopped calling and following me. I figured it was finally over, and he probably found someone else to love or harass. Mind you, I hadn't said anything to anyone. I don't believe there were any stalking laws yet, either. I don't remember. I was too scared to tell anyone because of what happened in the past. A few months later, it was finally May, and I couldn't graduate high school until I returned my books. Since I was 17, my mom would still be responsible for them, and I didn't want her to deal with having to pay for them. I realized that I had left them at my ex-boyfriend's house. Thinking he was totally over me because I hadn't heard anything from him for months, I knocked on the door and asked if he had my books. He had guests over at his house, so when he said they were in his room, I thought that was okay. While I was looking around for the books, he came into the room and locked the door behind him. He said he wanted to make love to me one more time before he would let me go. I said no and tried to leave, but he wouldn't budge. At one point, I put my hand behind his back and tried to grab the door handle, but he shoved me away from the door, hurting my arm. I told him that he was hurting me, and he oddly apologized like that wasn't okay, but I still couldn't leave. I sat there for hours until I finally gave in. He did it for the purpose of trying to get me pregnant so I would marry him, I assume. I know this because for the next 6 months he stalked me and called me asking if I was pregnant every day. We had the number changed several times, yet he still called over and over again. He finally just gave up and stopped calling me. I never told him I really was pregnant. I had lost the baby. There was no way I was going to tell him I was. I never said anything. I suppose it was because I had been threatened so many years before. It wasn't until recently that I remembered a lot of it. I remembered losing the baby, and even though it was through rape, it hurt a lot. I don't blame the baby for his horrible actions at all, but the pain of losing a child overshadowed what he did. In fact, I didn't remember all of it until he started recently harassing me on Facebook, which is where the Darknet horror story comes in. At first, I didn't remember much and joked about his car with him and stuff in the comments, but then I watched a movie on Lifetime, or maybe a Criminal Minds episode, where the same thing happened to a woman. The same arm movement while shoving her away from the door or some other place where she was being held captive by her boyfriend or husband. I saw both shows, but I can't tell you which one it was that triggered the memory. It could have been Devil's Pond on Lifetime. While what she went through in the movie was far more difficult than what I went through, this was never easy to deal with. He would message me and apologize for how he treated me, but never once mentioning that last day he held me against my will. He would say really creepy things such as, I still have pictures of you and I go look at them in the attic, or I still think about you, and mention that he was doing something creepy along those lines. This might not be creepy to some people, but I knew what he was doing when he said these things. I reminded him about what he did to me and that he was to leave me alone on Facebook or anywhere else and never contact me again. Instead of leaving me alone, he left condolences after my brother had passed. I told him that he had no right to say anything about my brother because if my brother had known what he had done, my brother probably would have gone to prison protecting me. Did he leave me alone? No. Well, he didn't attend the ceremony because he wasn't invited. He sent a friend of my brother's and his to send condolences for him because, quote unquote, he couldn't be there. Of course he couldn't be there because the room was full of friends of my brother and they had no idea what this guy did to me. I would never have invited him in the first place. He finally left me alone after he found some other poor woman to deal with his issues. Ironically, when he started harassing me online, he was married, and it was after I described to him what he did and why I wanted him to leave me alone is when his marriage ended. If this ever happens to you or a friend, don't be shy about it. I was mentally not able to say anything because of the predator when I was 9, but don't let that be your excuse. This can happen to anyone, whether it be a man, a woman, a teen, or anyone else. Don't be a victim. Tell someone and stop the predator in their tracks. And if you were a parent, listen to your child and don't just put it off as something that might happen. We need to be vigilant about these types of people and take away their control forever. If you have a story about stalkers in the internet and you would like me to tell it, please click on the contact link in the Darknet Horror Stories YouTube channel and send the story to me. Shorter stories will be combined with other stories. All stories will be told anonymously unless you request your name be told. Please do not include the names of the accused unless they have been charged with a crime.